Hey guys, tonight we drift down sun-flecked streams where tiny golden motes swirl beneath your paddle, each grain shimmering like a promise of wealth you probably won't survive without understanding. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the riverbank at dawn toes, sinking into damp sand as the first bird song cracks the hush. All around you, villagers gather at shallow fords, dipping bamboo baskets into the slow current to catch specks of gold dust, those glittering treasures washed down from distant headwaters. The air smells of wet earth and fresh millet porridge, and you can almost taste the coppery tang of sun-warmed metal on your tongue. This is the origin of dust trade, how small flecks of river gold first entered local barter networks, sparking a ripple of exchange that would one day build empires. Joke 1. If you think YouTube ads on your phone are annoying, try sitting through a full barter session with a fisherman who only accepts goats and yams in exchange for a teaspoon of gold. In these early days, gold dust isn't jewelry. It's coin, the lifeblood of intercommunity exchange. Mainstream historical fact: by the 6th century CE, West African riverine communities were panning gold dust and trading it for salt cloth and pottery across hundreds of miles long before camels even trudged the Sahara trade routes. You can almost hear the clink of wooden bowls scraping against rock, each dusty scoop a note in the symphony of barter. All manner of goods flow in return: fish oil for gourds, cola nuts for carved wooden stools, and sometimes even unsweetened cocoa. Talk about your bitter trades. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were regulated by formal guilds or relied on informal kinship ties. A quirky fringe tidbit floats through local rumor. Some old-timers claim that certain gold spots glimmer brightest only during full moons, when river spirits supposedly guide eager panners to hidden pockets of dust. Scientists dismiss this as folklore, an acoustic hallucination of river gods perhaps, but you picture yourself wading in silver-blasted water under a lunar halo, scooping moonbeams along with grains of awa. Joke 2. If your smartphone flashlight app ever tried to mimic moonlight gold panning, you'd just end up with a soggy screen and no treasure. As you trudge further upstream, you cross into the territory of riverine chieftains who levy small tolls on passing dust shipments, often a handful of granules skimmed off each trader's basket. This simple taxation system becomes the seed of royal revenue. Mainstream fact: by 750 CE, local rulers along the Niger and Senegal rivers taxed gold dust at fixed rates, using the proceeds to fund community granaries and seasonal festivals. You can almost see tents pitched for harvest feasts, where drummers in indigo tunics pound skins in time with the river's pulse. Historians still argue whether those tolls were standardized across kingdoms or varied wildly by season and harvest yield. But you know that from small levies come vast fortunes. You kneel beside an old woman guiding a novice, her gnarled hands rinsing silt from a worn wooden bowl. Her eyes shine with pride as she teaches you how to angle the bowl just so too steep and the dust runs off with the sand. Too shallow and you need another hour to see a single flake. This tactile knowledge passes from mentor to pupil in hushed tones often punctuated by laughter at botched scoops. Joke 3. If your GPS ever tried to navigate you to a gold spot, you'd be stuck in a thicket with a recalculating alert. Further along, you spot a small trading post crowned by a woven grass awning, where traders tally their dust in bamboo scales. A slender warrior in russet leans over the counter, weighing gold against a stack of salt bricks. Each brick smells of the desert they hauled across months of sun-scorched sand. Mainstream historical fact salt caravans from the Sahara exchanged hardened dust for river gold as early as the 8th century, creating a two-way artery of wealth that underpinned Ghana's rise and later Mali's golden age. You can almost hear the clatter of camel bells echoing in the dust, though you're a good 100 miles from the dunes. Historians still argue whether those salt-for-gold trades were monopolized by state authorities or conducted through free market caravans. In one corner of the market, a fringe conspiracy circulates. Some traders swear that rival merchants once dyed ordinary sand with plant extracts to mimic gold dust, hoping to pass off the fake as real. They say the trick only worked when the seller blinked at just the wrong moment. Skeptics call it a salted scam, while believers call it advanced magic. You tuck the idea into your mind alongside crocodile dung sunscreen absurd, perhaps, but funny enough to keep the bartering circle bright. As the sun climbs, you stand on a small wooden bridge peering at the glassy river, reflecting cedar rafts and smoke rising from cooking fires. You feel the heat of solar rays mingling with the memory of cool dawn mists, each breath carrying the promise of miners upriver. You recall the gentle sag of dugout canoes overloaded with bulging sacks of dust, paddled by dusky-skinned boatmen in saffron tunics, their chants aligning with cutthroat waves. This sensory tapestry weaves gold and water trade and tradition, forging the early pathways that shape kingdoms to come. And in this moment, you grasp how the simplest speck of gold dust becomes more than metal. It's a catalyst for societal transformation, a grain of possibility that glitters in the hands of dreamers and rulers alike. As you step off the bridge, you carry that golden echo with you, ready to trace the next bend in this riverine odyssey, where kingdoms rise on the shimmering glow of sun-kissed dust. You push off from the riverbank in a squat, double-hulled canoe carved from a single baobab trunk, the blade of your wooden paddle dipping with a soft splash in the dawn-lit water. All around you, dozens of similar vessels cluster in a slow-moving flotilla, their occupants clad in indigo and russet tunics, voices carrying chants that harmonize with plashing oars. You lean forward, gripping the smooth rail of woven palm fiber, and feel the low hum of collective motion as the canoes slip downstream toward market towns. There's something electric in the air, a riverine pulse that glues these floating convoys into a single living artery of exchange. As your canoe glides under an arch of tangled mangroves, you notice the carved prow of the boat ahead, a coiled serpent in shell gold meant to ward off submerged hazards. Fringe lore claims these gods in wood come alive at night, flickering their tongue-like figureheads to guide canoes safely, though modern skeptics call it nothing more than lantern reflections. Joke 1, if your canoe ever hisses at you, it's either angry at your paddling or you've forgotten to grease your oar lock. Your eyes drift over the cargo bulging sacks of cola nuts, wicker baskets of smoked fish, and of course, leather pouches brimming with gold dust tied carefully with braided sennit, so no precious speck escapes. A slender youth in saffron balances on the gunwale, adjusting the load with expert hands, while calling out to his neighbor, "How many grains for that yoke of yams, brother?" The barter banter echoes off canyon-like riverbanks, where crimson cliffs loom overhead, glistening with moisture. This canoe network follows the Niger's winding path connecting villages up to Timbuktu, Jenne, and beyond centers where gold dust transforms from barter coin into imperial treasure. Mainstream fact by the 9th century CE canoe convoys along the Niger River carried as much as 100 kilograms of gold dust per voyage, underpinning the wealth of early Ghana and Mali polities. You taste the tang of river spray on your lips, already rich with rumor of potent wealth awaiting you downstream. You tilt your head to track a flash of white among the reeds, an egret mirroring your slow glide, and wonder how many of these itinerant feeders learned navigation by shadowing canoe fleets. Historians still argue whether riverine bird guides were used intentionally by panners or simply opportunistic flotsam whisperers. But you note the curious symmetry. Both birds and canoes follow hidden currents. As the sun climbs, warm light dapples the water, illuminating suspended silt and tiny golden motes that slip through the straining bamboo sieves of a canoe up ahead. You lean over to catch drifting flecks on your palm, each one a glimmering promise of prosperity. Yet you know the real wealth flows not in handfuls of dust, but in the network of hands and voices weaving this flotilla. Joke two, if you tried to hail an Uber on water, you'd need a Mediterranean subscription and a fleet of gondoliers on speed dial. Further upstream, the river broadens into a tranquil lake-like expanse, and you round a bend to find a makeshift landing logs laid side by side, ropes of palm fiber taut between wooden stakes. Here, small ports flourish canoes tethered alongside reed barges that ferry traders ashore. Women in teal skirts crouch at these docks, weighing dust on bamboo scales against brass salt ingots, their laughter drifting like wind chimes over sun-warm planks. You step onto the landing board, the wood creaking beneath your sandals as you deposit a small pouch of dust at the tax hut's counter. A chieftain scribe, ink-stained fingers marking a tally in chalk on a wooden tablet, nods approvingly and returns 3 salt bricks hard as desert sun-baked clay. Mainstream fact local rulers along the Niger instituted standardized river tolls around 750 CE, skimming a small percentage of gold dust from passing traders to fund communal granaries and ritual festivals. You inhaled the scent of salted fish drying on racks nearby, imagining how these grains of salt once journeyed from the Sahara on camel caravans to meet their riverine counterparts. As you re-embark, you watch the flotilla merge back into a slow riverine parade. The current, though gentle, is insistent, a soft conveyor that requires constant paddling to maintain formation. You catch the eye of a bearded elder in russet, his paddle strokes slow but sure. He murmurs a proverb. The river knows no haste, but it carries all boats. You nod, feeling the truth in his words, as your canoe drifts in time with his. The mid-morning sun transforms the water into a rippled mirror, and you squint to spot a narrow side channel veering into cattail marshes. Local pilots know these shortcuts. They slice days off the journey navigating by water plants rather than stars when the canopy closes overhead. Fringe stories tell of clandestine pilots mapping secret back routes by observing frog calls, a symphony of croaks indicating water depth and hidden shoals. Scholars still argue whether these acoustic charts ever existed or were playful exaggerations by fishermen to scare ill-equipped travelers, but you tuck the tale into your mental chart. By midday, the flotilla reaches a wider junction where river meets tributary. Here canoes form star-shaped clusters to offload goods, and you watch porters in indigo sashes shoulder baskets of gold dust toward waiting traders. The air smells of dust and fermenting palm wine, a heady mixture that nips at your senses. You pause to dip your fingers into a shallow wooden bowl of cooling water, tracing the faint grooves worn by 1,000 paddles. In this midday market lull, hushed negotiations take place under palm leaf awnings. You hear talk of upriver conflicts, chieftains vying for control of prime panning spots, sending war canoes by moonlight to burn competitors' camps. Historians still argue whether these river wars were constant skirmishes or episodic raids tied to dry season scarcity. But the rumor pulses like fish scales shimmering in the shallows. You rejoin your canoe before the river's edge gets too busy, shoving off with a grunt as cargo-laden barges inch past. The downstream paddle stroke feels different now, heavier, with dust-laden urgency lighter, with the camaraderie of shared labor. Joke 3. If your treadmill offered a water mode, you'd still prefer paddling this river over any gym gadget, zero sweatband required. As late afternoon approaches, you glance upstream at the sun's reflection dancing on distant rapids. The flotilla slows rafts, pulled toward calmer pools. You relax your paddle, letting the current nudge you along as you reflect on the delicate choreography of riverine trade, a sequence of strokes port calls, toll booths, and midnight shortcuts that link Panner to Paramount. You feel the hull's gentle hum beneath you. Call back to Section 3's carved curves and realize these vessels are more than transport. They are living vessels of culture, memory, and gold-dusted dreams. By sunset, you're back on the broad Niger, the water glowing like molten bronze. The flotilla fans out for camp landings. Canoes beach themselves on sandy shoals. Fires are lit and rhythmic drumming begins. You sense the river's lullaby, a harmony of plash paddle and song weaving through the mangroves. And as you settle for the night, you know that tomorrow's journey will trace these watery veins once more, ferrying gold dust and stories between the hearts of kingdoms yet to rise. You step onto the sunlit quay at Jenna, its mud brick walls glowing saffron in the midday heat, and inhale the mingled aromas of roasted millet, spice-laden stews, and river mud. All around you, squat canoes moored bow to stern disgorge, their precious cargo leather pouches fat, with gold dust stacks of salt slabs wrapped in palm fiber bundles of finely woven cloth dyed in indigo and russet. The quay thrums with negotiation traders squat on woven mats, balancing bamboo scales suspended by senate cords, while scribes tally tallies in chalk on wooden boards. Here in these market towns, Timbuktu just upriver Jenny, across a braided channel, gold dust transcends commodity to become the spark-lighting regional empires. You wander between stalls under woven grass awnings, fingertips brushing cowrie shells displayed alongside carved wooden stools, each shell marking a weight standard refined through decades of barter callback to river convoy weighing. A trader in teal tunic tips gold dust from one leaf-shaped pan to another. The glittering cascade like captured starlight mainstream historical fact. By the 11th century CE, Jenny and Timbuktu hosted weekly markets where gold dust from West African rivers was traded for North African salt and Mediterranean cloth, turning these inland towns into bustling hubs of a pan-Saharan economy. You almost taste the history as you sip a small clay cup of spiced tea, its sugary warmth a jolting contrast to the cool weight of metal in your mind. Joke 1. If Amazon delivered gold dust, you'd still have to haggle over shipping costs. As you weave deeper into the maze of stalls, you overhear whispers of clandestine vaults beneath the great mosque-fringed tidbit, claims that local elders once hid sacks of dust in secret subterranean chambers to thwart tax collectors. Scientists call it geological fantasy, but you picture torchlit tunnels veined with gold, each chamber echoing with dripping water and hushed vows. These stories sparkle in your mind like flecks of awe, even as scholars still argue whether such vaults ever existed or were later legends spun to explain missing revenue. You pause at a corner where a wiry woman in indigo belts out her price, 2 handfuls of dust for this iron pot. A squat youth retorts, tugging at his turban, not unless you throw in a goat and 2 yams. Laughter ripples through the group like wind over water. Joke 2. If Tinder had a market edition, you'd swipe right on that pot and regret it when it cracked under stew. Further down, you encounter foreign eyes among the crowd, North African merchants in saffron robes, their camels tethered beyond the town walls, lanterns dangling like captive stars. They haggle in halting Songhay Arabic phrases laced with Berber accents, negotiating gold for salt rates that shift with the sun's passage. The air crackles with cross-cultural banter, mixing cola nut chatter with desert caravanner boasts. Historians still argue whether these foreign traders set up permanent caravanseries in town or simply camped seasonally. But you sense both patterns playing out in the milling masses. You slip into the shade of a raised platform where town elders convene. Their charcoal-stained beards gleam like storm clouds, and they weigh gold dust against palm oil, vials their scales humming with ancient precision. You remember the canoe convoy's toll booths, Section 2, but here the levy is more subtle a pinch from each pouch collected to fund the next harvest festival and maintain the town walls. Mainstream fact, Jenny's rulers instituted graduated dust levies in the 12th century to underwrite communal grain stores and mosque maintenance, reinforcing the link between trade and statecraft. You admire the logic, no goats lost, no swords drawn, just orderly tribute. Beyond the platform, performers in saffron and teal drum staccato rhythms on hollowed gourds, the beat echoing off sun-baked walls. Their music marks the midday pause, a breath between deals. You catch a toddler's grin as she tries to mimic the beat, with a wooden pestle on an overturned pot. Innocence meets history in a single playful gesture. Joke 3. If your smartwatch tried to track this heart rate, it would short circuit from pure excitement. As the afternoon wears on, you drift across a narrow reed bridge to Timbuktu, its skyline punctuated by the spires of the Jingareba Mosque. Scholars perched on wooden benches recite lines of Arabic scripture by torchlight. But daylight brings new lessons. Dusty scribes reel out parchment scrolls coated in shell gold flourishes, recording dust for cloth tallies in graceful calligraphy. You run your fingertip over gilded characters, each stroke a testament to literate trade. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's manuscripts primarily chronicled commerce or served more as religious texts. But you revel in their dual purpose. You pause beneath a large baobab traders, tucking bark strips around its trunk as offering to the river god. Fringe belief says these bark inscriptions absorb the river's memory of every grain of gold that passed by an eternal ledger written in living wood. Scholars scoff at arboreal accounting, yet you find comfort in the poetic symmetry trees and rivers preserving wealth in their cores. As you press a small piece of carved sennit into the bark, you sense your own story weaving into the ancient ledger. Dusk glows saffron as market activity wanes. You linger at a riverbank shrine where a lone elder scatters grains of gold dust into the current, chanting a verse of thanks to the river as living ancestor, a practice documented by early travelers. Mainstream fact, many riverine communities concluded their trading days with offerings cast into the water, believing it ensured safe returns and honored spirits of the deep. You drop your own tiny handful, watching each mote vanish beneath the rippling surface. Historians still argue whether those offerings were literal pledges of fate or symbolic tokens. But you feel the river's acceptance as a gentle ripple. Night settles in lanterns hung from palm poles, flicker like captive fireflies along the quay, and you slip back into your canoe. The hull's carved serpent prow glints in lamplight, a silent promise for tomorrow's voyage. As you push off, the last echoes of the market fade, leaving you with the hum of water and the remembered rhythms of gold dust exchange. You cradle your final pouch against your chest, savoring its weight and warmth. In this moment, you grasp how Timbuktu and Jenne weren't just crossroads, they were crucibles where gold dust catalyzed kingdoms. And as your canoe drifts into the velvet dark, you carry that golden glow in your mind, ready for the next bend in this bedtime history. You mount your camel at dusk, the caravan stretching into a ribbon of flickering lanterns across the rolling dunes. The beast beneath you grumbles, shifting its bulk as a desert breeze lifts fine grains of sand that shimmer like gold dust in miniature. You wrap your indigo shuka tighter around your shoulders against the chill, inhale the scent of hot sand and distant oases, and settle into the steady rhythm of padded footsteps on powdery ground. Tonight, you join the Trans-Saharan beginnings, the camel caravans carrying sacks of gold dust to Maghreb merchants under an ocean of stars. The silence is profound, broken only by the soft clink of wooden water buckets swaying from saddle struts, and the low murmur of guides chanting prayerful verses against scorpions and sandstorms. You lean forward, fingertips brushing the neck of your camel's coarse fur, and feel the animal's slow rise and fall as it navigates the dune crests with uncanny sure-footedness. Briefless jokes drift through your mind. Joke 1, if Uber ever launched a desert mode, you'd need nothing but a hot rating and a sun hat. As the caravan crests a dune, you glimpse the Milky Way's dense core blazing overhead, its glowing band more vivid than any chart. This is your compass now. No magnetic needle needed. Mainstream historical fact. By the 9th century CE, West African gold dust was ferried across the Sahara on camelback, linking Ghana's mines to North African markets in a trade network that stretched over 2,000 miles and took weeks to complete. You remember the Riverine Convoys Section 2 that once carried dust downstream? But this is a different pulse camel, hooves on sand, not paddles on water, yet both routes pulse with the same golden ambition. You adjust your pack of leather pouches secured with braided sennit and peek inside at the soft glimmer of fine gold dust, each pouch promising the wealth of half a kingdom. The desert air feels thin and cold. Each breath is a whispered vow to reach the next oasis. The lead guide, a wiry elder in russet robes, scans the horizon with unerring confidence. Fringe tidbit surfaces. Some desert nomads insist that certain constellations only guide caravans correctly if you hum ancestral chants as you ride an auditory GPS. They say, though, skeptics dismiss it as sand nymph stories. You tuck that thought alongside cloud chants from Section 6, amused that even the desert might demand a karaoke backup. Occasionally, the guide pauses to demonstrate sunstones, crystals chipped from desert outcrops that polarize sunlight at dusk, helping lost caravans find the precise direction of the setting sun. You hold the palm-sized stone up, watching its golden interior glow under ember skies. Historians still argue whether sunstones were widespread navigational aids or rare curiosities held only by elite guides, but you feel their magic flicker in your hand. Night deepens, and the caravan approaches a small oasis ringed by date palms. Lantern-lit tents rise like ebony petals around a central fire pit where camel drivers rest on mats of woven palm. You taste the sweet hot tang of mint tea as a pot simmers over ember steam, curling into the star-studded air. You laugh softly, joke too. If Starbucks tried to franchise here, they'd need a generator factory and an endless supply of almond milk, neither of which thrive in sand. Stalking through the palm grove, you admire the craftsmanship of mud brick cisterns that capture every precious drop of life-giving water. A merchant in teal robes weighs a pouch of gold dust against a sheathed dagger, and a stack of salt bricks scales humming in delicate balance. Mainstream historical fact by the 11th century salt was as coveted as gold dust across the Sahara, with caravans returning loaded with white treasure that preserved food and flavored life in West African kingdoms. You imagine the caravanners' pride in trading sun-baked salt for river-washed gold, a poetic symmetry of elemental exchange. After a brief rest, the guide summons you back onto your camel for the moonlit leg. The dunes transform under silver glow, each ridge etched in sharp relief. You lean into the saddle, close your eyes, and let the camel's gait lull you in time with the wind sigh through palm fronds. Your mind drifts to the Memory Island's chant Section 7, and you murmur its verses, recasting them as by crescent moon set your course. Joke 3. If your sleep app ever tried to track REM in a desert, it'd just report all sand. At midnight, the caravan splits at a crossroads. One group follows a wider rock-strewn track favored in the dry season. Your group takes a narrower path, favoring a hidden spring. You grip the reins tighter, heart alight, with anticipation and a hint of dread. The path dips into a wadi, a dried riverbed where slick stones could send camels tumbling. You recall the canoe's carved curves, Section 3, guiding you through river rapids. Here, the camel's padded fetlock and your own balance guide you through sandy rapids. Historians still argue whether camel or horse was introduced first into trans-Saharan routes. But you trust your beast's surefoot more than any imported steed. Ahead, you glimpse torchlights shimmering on dunes, a rival caravan's camp. Under the lantern's glow stand merchants in linen turbans, their soot-dark faces lit by market fervor. You sense the tension here. Gold dust might fetch and barter a consignment of leather goat drums or a crate of spices from distant Egypt. Night trading is a precarious art. You barter in whispers amid swirling sand, weighing dust and darkness, and feeling each granule's promise. Scholars still argue whether nocturnal markets were safer from bandits or simply forced by searing daytime heat. But you appreciate the cool night at your back. As dawn's pale glow brushes the eastern horizon, the caravan reaches the fortified town of Tagahaza, a salt mining enclave in salt-crusted flats. White mounds glint in the morning sun like built pyramids, and camels kneel to lap brine-stained watercloths. You dismount, dusting sand from your robes, and watch salt blocks loaded onto camels destined for riverine routes back to Jannah. You reflect on the reciprocation river dust to desert salt, a closed loop of elemental exchange that binds kingdoms across disparate realms. You inhale the sharp mineral tang of salt and let it mingle with the lingering heat of gold dust in your palm. The market stalls fill quickly as traders from across the desert arrive, each bringing news and negotiating rates that shift with the wind. You join the kerfuffle, trading a pouch of dust for a carved salt slab and a handful of preserved dates. The taste is stark, yet sweet, a desert sunrise in your mouth. Finally, you remount as the sun climbs high, ready for the last leg to Maghreb outposts. The caravan stretches again like a silken thread across the dunes, each camel's hoof-fall a note in a grand desert symphony. You lean forward, feeling both the weight of gold dust in your pack and the lightness of awe under the vast starlit dome. You carry more than dust here. You carry the legacy of riverine routes, of secret vaults and clandestine shortcuts, woven now into the fabric of Sahara's grand tapestry. And as the dunes roll on, you realize that every grain of gold dust is also a grain of history, trampled through camel caravans and river convoys alike, shaping kingdoms in the sweat of traders and the glint of sun and sand. In this trance of hoof and heavens, you glimpse the vast continuum of bedtime history, where dust and dreams journey hand in hand across the world's golden vein. You step through the ornate gate of King Kayamaga's court, the morning sun catching gilded spires and casting fractured rainbows across the courtyard. Palm-woven tents pitched in ochre and russet line the perimeter, their flaps tied back to reveal stacks of leather pouches brimming with golden dust. You trudge over flagstones, smoothed by centuries of sandal and hoof, inhaling the mingled scents of roasting goat-sweet papyrus reed mats and the faint tang of metal from the royal mint. In this moment, you realize how kingdoms rise on dust revenues Ghana's rulers tax, passing gold dust funding palaces, armies, and royal entourages that parade through these halls like living constellations. Ahead, a row of stout tax collectors in indigo robes swivels leather scales with practiced precision, measuring each pouch against polished brass weights. Callbacks to those riverine bamboo balances, Section 3, and caravan toll booths, Section 4. You offer up your own humble pouch, and the collector's calloused hands tip it gently, letting specks cascade like captured sunbeams. Mainstream historical fact: by the 9th century CE, the rulers of the Ghana Empire imposed standardized levies on gold dust, taking roughly 1/10 of each trader's load to underwrite royal coffers and fund monumental public works. You almost taste the golden promise on your tongue as the final granules fall away. Beyond the weighing platform, you spy a raised dais, where the king's scribes labor over wooden tablets, chalking long columns of numbers that spiral toward infinity. Their ivory-tipped quills scratch and hiss, each tally a testament to the kingdom's affluence. You catch the eye of one scribe, and he offers a wry smile. Never trust a merchant's memory when a scribe has paper. Joke 1, if Excel existed here, you'd need no scribes. But you'd miss the dramatic ink smudges during midday heat. As you wander deeper, lavish displays of tribute circle before you, a line of saffron-robed nobles bearing woven baskets brimming with cola nuts, salt slabs, and cowrie shell tokens. In the center, a carved sandalwood throne sits beneath a gilded canopy, and leaning against its legs are ceremonial swords inlaid with gold dust. Fringe tidbit: some court insiders whisper that the king's blade is literally forged with river gold in its hilt. Believing the metal's earthly spirit will grant righteous judgment, modern scholars dismiss it as royal legend. Historians still argue whether Ghana's swords were practical weapons of war or primarily ceremonial symbols of power. You pause at a pavilion draped in crimson cloth where palace artisans hammer sheets of beaten gold into mosaics, embellishing the king's sandals and shield rims. Their delicate hammers ping like distant harp strings, each tap coaxing the metal into shimmering perfection. You peek over an artisan's shoulder. The mosaic depicts the blacksmith god wielding thunderbolts of gold, a divine reminder that earthly wealth mirrors celestial favor. Joke 2. If Damien Hirst ever saw this pavilion, he'd ask for a 24-karat skull next to Mona Lisa, and still feel short-changed. In the heart of the courtyard, you find the royal treasury, a vaulted chamber, dotted with alcoves, each lined with broken Senate braids, cowrie shells, and sealed clay jars stuffed with dust. You lean close to the rim of an open jar, inhaling the metallic perfume of concentrated wealth, your reflection trembling on its surface like a ghost of fortune. A guard in russet leans in and murmurs, "They say the treasury is so vast that the moonlight phases through its dust, waxing and waning like a living lantern." Historians still argue whether that claim is poetic hyperbole or evidence of enormous hoards that dazzled early Arab travelers. You press onward to the palace terrace, where a row of elephant tusk thrones overlooks the bustling city below. You perch at the edge, letting your fingers trace the smooth ivory and gilded vines, then gaze out at the endless sprawl of mud brick houses and market stalls, all fed by the river's artery and the king's dust levees. You imagine the caravans from distant lands, Berbers in saffron turbans, Songhai traders in indigo chadors, lining up at these walls to offer their gold for safe passage. Historians still argue whether Ghana's wealth derived more from trade taxes or from direct mining operations within its borders. But you sense both shaped the kingdom's meteoric rise. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you descend into the palace kitchens, where dozens of cooks in teal wrappers stir calabash pots of spiced millet porridge, threading slivers of ginger and ribbons of grease over crackling embers. They ladle steaming bowls for the king's household, each serving crowned by a sprinkle of crushed gold-dusted nuts, a playful symbol that in Ghana's court, even simple porridge is gilded. Joke 3. If Starbucks launched in the 11th century, you can bet they'd have a gold dust latte on the menu topped with real flakes. Beyond the kitchens in a quiet courtyard garden, you find the royal librarian, a wizened elder, in saffron logging dust tributes into palm leaf manuscripts tied with Senate cords. He offers you a folded page embossed with shell gold flourishes, showing trade routes from Kumbisale to Zanaga. You run your fingertip along the map's inked lines, feeling the ridges of travel etched into paper. Mainstream historical fact, scholars believe that cartographic documents, though rudimentary, guided Ghana's governors in managing far-flung border outposts and monitoring caravan traffic. You marvel at the ancient ingenuity. Modern GPS could learn a thing or two from palm leaf precision. As twilight creeps in, torch-bearers light iron lanterns that cast flickering shadows across the courtyard. You join a procession of nobles in formal farewell to the king's audience chamber. The palace brass band strikes up a ceremonial fanfare, coralutes echo in layered melody drums, thrum like distant thunder, honoring the golden dust that sustains this realm. A court poet in indigo steps forward to recite verses comparing gold grains to fallen stars, each shimmer a covenant between heaven and earth. Historians still argue whether such courtly poetry reinforced royal ideology or served merely as entertainment for the elite. But you feel the power in every gilded simile. You slip away from the pomp and find yourself on the city's outer ramparts, the night sky, a vault crowning the mud brick silhouettes. Below you, torchlight dances on river channels where lantern-lit canoes drift toward Jenne and Timbuktu. You recall paddling among those same riverine barges, Sections 2, 3, and riding dunes with Camel Caravan Section 4. And you realize that all these routes converge here at the nexus of gold dust taxation and royal grandeur. Finally, you settle on the rampart's edge, clutching your own small pouch of dust as a humble tribute. The cool night wind carries the faint chords of palace music and the soft murmur of river through reeds. You lean back, letting the dust and stars mingle in your thoughts, and feel the weight of history settling on your shoulders like a royal cloak. In this hush, you understand how the kingdoms rose on dust revenues tiny gold grains tipping the scales of power, one scoop at a time. You slip into the low-ceilinged weighhouse at the edge of Jenna's Key, the air thick with the hiss of bamboo scales and the sweet tang of gold dust clinging to your fingertips. Here, under a woven grass awning, traders line up to prove the purity and weight of their dust, and you watch the subtle dance of deception that can gild or ruin a fortune. A slender merchant in russet sleeves tips his pan deliberately, letting dust cascade in a slower hypnotic arc. Yet you sense some grains sticking to his camel hair jerkin, hidden like tiny spies. Fringed tales swear that clever cheats would secretly strip a strand of camel hair dusted with gold, then reweave it into their turbans, paddling a rabbit's ear full of fortune past the scales. Scientists dismiss it as sand in the gears legend, but you tuck that notion alongside cloud chants from Section 6, amused that even the purest dust can be spiked with trickery. You lean forward, toes brushing cool river mud, and watch a chubby tax collector with ink-stained fingers weigh a trader's pouch against a stack of brass weights. Mainstream historical fact by the 10th century CE imperial assayers in Ghana and Mali employed official weights and seal marks to standardize the valuation of gold dust, forcing traders to use marked bronze weights rather than ad hoc bamboo scales, an early form of quality control. Yet despite these measures, you notice how some pouches bulge with dust that shifts suspiciously when the collector's back is turned. Joke 1. If eBay had existed back then, these scammers would have sold counterfeit dust in mint condition, complete with fake grading certificates. Across the dirt floor, you spot a wiry youth in indigo, whispering to a merchant he'll sprinkle a pinch of dust-laden sesame seeds into your bag in exchange for a silver armlet, temporarily, of course. The seeds, once sieved out at the next weigh station, supposedly vanish without a trace, leaving the buyer blissfully unaware. Historians still argue whether such sesame seed subterfuge was widespread or confined to tales spun around firelight. But you can't help but grin at the delicious absurdity of sneaking gold on the back of humble legumes. You move to a shadowed corner, where a line of worn iron weights lies on a wooden plank. A silver-haired assayer taps each weight with an iron fire tong, listening for a clean ring. Any dull thud marks a chipped or tampered piece. A merchant dressed in saffron robes watches anxiously as the assayer calls out, 1 lion's weight true, 2 lions' weight true, 3 lions, weight. The third weight rings hollow, and the guild seal is declared void. Joke 2. If your Fitbit ever started missing steps, you'd recalibrate its firmware. Here they just tossed the faulty weight into the river and told it to swim home. Lean men in russet and teal belts gather around a squat brazier, hulling a handful of goat's hairs to test filter grease, another fringe trick where cheaters coated their dust with animal fat so it stuck to the pan and slipped past bamboo sieve edges. Scientists wave off the fat coating theory as an old wives' tale, but you shiver at the thought of warm grease spoiling the shine of freshly washed gold. Scholars still argue whether grease filtering was a real practice or simply a humorous cautionary tale. Yet your gaze flickers to the sizzling hair on embers, imagining it whispering secrets to passing traders. You step outside into the harsh midday sun, where a river breeze cools your brow. On a raised wooden platform, a tribunal of elder traders convenes in indigo robes, their charcoal-streaked beards gleaming like storm clouds. They rehearse dusty oaths, gold pure scales sure, cheat one face the spear. A merchant caught in cheat, caught red-handed with a pinch concealed under a fingernail, was once said to have his pouch hung from the town gate until the next feast, a humiliating spectacle. Mainstream historical fact in some West African markets, punitive fines and public shaming were common penalties for gold dust fraud, reinforcing trust in the trade network. You imagine the scandalous gossip swirling like smoke around that hanging pouch. Each secret whisper a ripple in the market's calm surface. Nearby, a lean scribe in saffron settles disputes by consulting palm leaf manuals listing standard weights and cheat countermeasures. You peek at his ledger transcript after transcript of fines collected, scales broken, and traders exiled for repeated offenses. His inkpot sits beside a tiny wicker basket of cowrie shells, each shell marking a tax exemption for favored guild members. Joke 3. If Kickstarter funded this scribe's next project, he'd crown it Perfect Scales for Perfect Souls, all backed by a promise of zero fraud, though likely delivered with one sleight of hand. You cross back to the budget of scales, where a young apprentice in teal practices spotting counterfeit dust under a patch of date palm shade. She rubs a pinch between her palms, watching for coarse grit that betrays sand or odd brown flecks that signal adulteration. Her instructor's voice drifts over, "Learn to taste scent and sight, child. That is your best gauge." You lean in, testing your own senses against hers, and feel the market's heartbeat in every sift and swirl. Historians still argue whether these sensory tests were formal training or born of personal apprenticeship, but you appreciate the artistry of dust judging as much as any written manual. As afternoon lengthens, you watch a merchant secretly swap pouches with a companion, hoping the inspector won't notice the differing knot of their Senate ties. But a hawk-eyed assayer flicks his gaze points with a carved ivory stylus and halts the boatman in his tracks. The thief's blood drains in the dusty light as the assayer announces, "Your knot speaks your guilt." Joke 4. If not Flick's stream detective shows back then, this twist would top the charts, gone with the wind-borne dust. As the sun dips low, you follow the last weighed pouches onto a flotilla of canoes bound for Timbuktu and beyond. The glittering sacks bob against polished planks, the river's reflection shimmering like spun gold. You lean on the rail and inhale deep, tasting dust-laden memory on your tongue, proof that even the purest trade carries the taint of human cunning. And as you drift away, you carry the lesson that no amount of regulation can outrun a determined cheat, but that communal trust backed by sharp scales and sharper eyes remains the finest currency of all. You set foot on the blazing sands of Cairo as Mansa Musa's caravan sweeps through the city like a golden tide, your indigo robes fluttering in the desert breeze. All around you, 60,000 souls trail behind coach-like camels. The beasts' humps, laden with ostrich feather fans, brass buckets of pure dust, and silk canopies gilded in gold leaf. The air trembles with anticipation. This is the Mali Empire at its zenith under Mansa Musa, and you're part of the spectacle that will reshape Mediterranean economies. Ancient minarets catch the morning sun, their shadows flickering across the courtyard, where you stand feeling the collective heartbeat of empire. beneath your sandals. You trail the procession weaving between eunuchs and saffron turbans, fanning out gold dust envelopes to local merchants. Each envelope is a dazzling gift, sometimes a quarter kilo of fine river gold, bestowed with a flourish that leaves Egyptian traders slack-jawed. Mainstream historical fact in 1324, C.E. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca distributed so much gold in Cairo that the metal's value fluctuated for over a decade, triggering a regional inflation that reverberated across Mediterranean markets. You practically taste that inflation on your tongue, sweet, heady, and absurdly excessive, like buying a coffee only to discover the cup itself is pure all. As you pass beneath the vaulted gateway, murmur swirl of Luna's lobes fringe lore that claims secret lunar rituals. Aboard Mansa Musa's lead ship, blessed the caravan with extra luck. Each new moon bathing gold dust stores and silver fire that repelled storms. Scholars still argue whether such rituals actually occurred or were later tales woven to justify the king's flawless journey. But you tuck that myth alongside the cloud chant from Section 6, amused at the image of sailors chanting under lunar halos on the Nile. The rhythmic stomp of camel hooves drowns out the city's usual din. You feel a shiver of surreal glamour as the caravan halts at the great mosque's courtyard. There, as if on cue, gold-dusted fountains burst forth, water spouting from ornate spigots that drip flecks of awe into stone basins. You crouch to cup that shimmering cascade, letting droplets roll over your fingertips before you gingerly taste them. Joke 1, if your diet app logged pure gold as a nutrient, you'd hit your macro goals immediately, but risk collapsing your entire economy. Inside the mosque's cool marble hall, you join a solemn procession of scholars, nobles, and holy men. Mansa Musa strides at the front wrapped in teal and russet silks that trail behind him like a comet's tail. He tips a gilded basin into another's outstretched hands, a symbolic gift to local imams. The hall rings with Quranic verses recited in deep rolling tones that harmonize with the mosque's domed acoustics. Mainstream historical fact, this lavish patronage of Islamic institutions cemented Timbuktu's reputation as a center of learning, as Mansa Musa funded madrasas and libraries along his route to Mecca. Today, you feel his legacy in every whispered scholarly chant that floats through Cairo's narrow alleys. As midday approaches, the caravan breaks for rest among date palms. You wander to a cluster of merchant tents where Bolognian, Andalusian, and Venetian traders marvel at dust poured onto ceramic plates. A bespectacled Genoese scribes a tally in Latin script, muttering un kilo, 1000 ducati, out of sheer wonder. Historians still argue whether those European ambassadors fully grasped the sheer scale of Mali's wealth or simply inflated their own journals to dazzle patrons back home, but you grin at visions of medieval popes scrambling to mint more coin. You seize a moment to slip away into a nearby souk where artisans hammer gold dust mosaics into ostrich eggshells and mosaic lamp globes. Their hammers ping softly against metal, a soothing metronome to your thoughts. Fringed tidbit surfaces. Some craftsmen claim they mixed crushed glass from Venetian mirrors into gold dust to create starlit inlays that sparkle like constellations when lantern lit. You chuckle joke too. If your IKEA lampshade got a starlit upgrade, you'd need a new electric bill to match. Back in the caravan courtyard, you join a circle of griot storytellers in saffron and russet, who recount Mansa Musa's exploits in sing-song cadence. They spin tales of dust so heavy it bent camel saddles and rivers, running gold slick for days after his passage. A lone elder strums a kora, its harp-like chords weaving melody with each verse. You sway with the rhythm, imagining that same golden riverine pulse from Section 2 rippling through your veins. Historians still argue whether these stories are hyperbole or rooted in eyewitness awe. But you savor the blend of fact and legend as richly as you would sweeten tea. As late afternoon gilds the city again, the caravan readies to move onward toward Mecca's sands. You hitch your camel to the next section of the line, feeling the shift in tension as the beasts stir in unison. You glance down at your own pouch of dust, smaller than Mansa Musa's, but heavy with memory. You recall river banks, caravans, and palace courtyards, each chapter a layer of this golden tapestry. Joke 3. If your fitness tracker counted steps by gold grams carried, you'd be the fittest person in Mali. Before departing, you pause at the great bazaar's edge, where scholars barter manuscripts. You nab a palm leaf book of celestial navigation, its pages dusted with gold motifs marking star alignments. You slip the book into your satchel, knowing that tomorrow's shipments will include both dust and doted knowledge. Scholars still argue whether Mali's golden age fueled Africa's intellectual flourishing, or if wealthy patrons simply imported knowledge from abroad. But you feel the spark of scholarship igniting in every gilded leaf. Night falls as the caravan threads through palm groves toward the desert's edge. You lean back in your saddle, tracing the Milky Way's brilliant swath overhead, and recall how star compasses guided riverine panners. Sections 1, 2, and Desert Nomads, Section 4, alike. Now they guide royal pilgrimages. You taste the dust on your lips and sense the pulse of kingdoms forged in glitter. And you know the journey is far from over. You ascend the sandy embankment above Gao's bustling riverside pier, the late afternoon sun flickering off the Niger like molten bronze. All around you, prized canoes of the Songhai fleet glide in their reed-thatched decks laden with leather pouches of dust crates of cola nuts and woven mats bound with cowrie shells. You steady yourself against a carved rail studded with tiny gilded flourishes, call back to those shell gold star symbols on the canoe in Section 2, and watch as Songhai's conquerors leverage gold dust to forge alliances and fund military campaigns along the Niger Bend. You weave through uniformed envoys in indigo and russet, carrying dust tributes from vassal towns like Timbuktu and Jenne. One young emissary unfurls a map painted on hide tracing routes to distant warlords whose loyalty is purchased by gold. Mainstream historical fact, by the late 15th century CE, the Songhai Empire, under Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad, had consolidated control over vast stretches of the Niger, using gold dust diplomacy to enlist regional chiefs and supply armies that patrolled river corridors and secured strategic oases. You practically feel the weight of those pouches in your own satchel, a silent currency of power. In a shaded colonnade, you overhear a fringed tidbit. From a grizzled palace scribe, he claims the Songhai once coated their war canoe oars with a secret gold-infused resin, believing it would repel enemy blades and drive faster in the sun. Scientists dismiss this as a fanciful ploy resin doesn't turn ferric oxide into gilded armor. But you tuck the story next to the grease-coated dust sheets from Section 6, charmed by human ingenuity in pursuit of advantage. Joke 1, if WD-40 ever made a Songhai edition, it'd come with flecks of OW and a battle-tested label. You step onto a raised platform where a brass horn calls the assembly to order. A tall official in saffron robes holds a scale tipped with a sack of gold dust stamped with Songhai's royal seal, a roaring fish motif that's as much propaganda as currency. He recites the terms, subordinate chiefs must supply a fixed quota of dust each harvest season or face punitive razzias from cavalrymen in damask tunics. The crowd murmurs assent cowrie and keel harmonizing in a riverine chant that underscores the song of empire. Historians still argue whether Songhai's dust diplomacy was a form of benevolent patronage or veiled coercion, but you sense the tension between carrot and stick in every nodding gesture. Nearby veterans in russet wrappers brag of campaigns funded entirely by dust levies, tales of riverside sieges at dawn, and lightning raids on rival cities. One whispers, "We seized 500 sacks of dust at Kukia. Our spoils paid for 10 years of palace bells." You eye his jeweled dagger, its sheath inlaid with gold dust mosaics, like a miniature battlefield map. Joke 2. If History Channel reran those exploits, they'd call it Gold Rush Sahara Edition, complete with dramatic slow-mo of dust clouds. A young diplomat in teal steps forward to present gifts from distant chiefs, a carved ivory tusk encrusted with gold dust dots, a leopard skin shield edged in gilt, and a wooden headrest wrapped in shimmering threads. Each tribute represents a link in Songhai's vast tributary network, binding forest, savanna, and desert under a gilded web of obligation. Mainstream historical fact tributary systems in West African empires often demanded both dust and luxury goods, ivory hides and kola nuts from conquered regions, blending economic and symbolic ties to reinforce hierarchical order. You can almost hear the ivory's echoing ring as it taps the platform. In a quieter courtyard, you find captains of riverine flotillas polishing carved figureheads, crocodile-snouted prows painted in shell gold, each representing a conquered town's totem animal. Fringe belief insists these totems contain the spirit of vanquished foes, offering the canoe extra strength in battle, an animistic power-up that modern historians shrug off as myth-making. You run your hand along the crocodile's ridged spine and imagine it thrumming with ancestral might, a mythic code woven into wood. The midday air shimmers, and you pause to sip spiced millet beer from a calabash ladle. Its frothy head tickles your nose with ginger and honey notes. No iron-filtered lagers here. Joke 3, if Miller Lite landed in Gao, they'd need to rename it Mansa's Draft to compete with local brew. Laughter bubbles among envoys cutting through the court's formalities with jovial relief. As afternoon wanes, you follow a group of war canoes being loaded for yet another expedition upriver. Spears and shields rest between dust pouches, soldiers chanting war songs that echo off sandstone facades. You lean against the gilded rail, tasting dust tang on your lips and feeling the visceral link between gold revenues and martial might. Historians still argue whether Songhai's military success owed more to naval power or cavalry dominance. But here, on the water's edge, you sense both coursing through the empire's veins. A sudden breeze stirs rippling curtains of palm fronds, and you glimpse a messenger racing ashore on a swift dugout canoe, clutching urgent scrolls. The scroll speaks of rebellion in Kukia ironworks, destroyed dust stores plundered. A hush falls over the flotilla as captains exchange grim looks. You rise heart-tightening gold dust diplomacy can quell dissent through generosity. But dust-driven armies can also roll in thunderous retribution. As twilight descends, torches are lit along the quay, their flames dancing across golden scales and dust-streaked armor. You join a council where emissaries debate whether to grant Kukia leniency or raise it entirely, weighing political stability against spectacle of power. The brassophony of scales, drums, and voices blends into a murmurous chorus. Songhai's destiny forged in dust and deliberation. You step back onto your own boat, clutching your pouch of dust and a carved fish-proud totem gifted by the flotilla captain. You watch canoes depart under lamplit skies, the water's surface smoothed by oarless glide. In the hush, you understand how dust diplomacy shapes empires not just by gold's glitter, but by the human networks it knits together from riverbanks to royal courts. And as your canoe drifts into the shimmering night, you carry with you the pulse of Songhai's golden diplomacy, ready to map the next bend in this bedtime history. You hack through a thicket of acacia and baobab saplings on a misty morning, your machete glinting under dew-laden leaves, as you follow a wizened guide whose russet cloak drips with forest moisture. Beneath your boots, loamy earth exudes the musky tang of hidden wealth, and you almost taste the promise of gold on your tongue. This is the realm of secret gold sources and mythic mines. The whispered stories of subterranean rivers of Aurum that flow like molten streams beneath the earth, carrying fortunes beyond imagination. You pause, breathing in the humid air, and let the forest's hush settle around you, a natural ASMR of rustling leaves and distant bird calls, coaxing you deeper into legend's embrace. Your guide pauses at an ancient termite mound carved into the shape of a squat hut and taps its side with an iron fire tongue. Here he murmurs the earth trembles with gold's heartbeat. Fringe lore claims that when the mound's center is hollowed, just so golden and sands cascade in a hidden chute, a secret vein tapped by ancestors who knew the land's rhythms as intimately as they knew the Niger's currents. Scientists wave this off as hearsay, grains of desire conjured by eager minds, but you picture moonlit initiates prying open earthen doors to claim a handful of liquid sunlight. Joke 1. If Indiana Jones traded his whip for a termite trowel, he'd stumble over these mounds with a recalculating treasure screen. You trudge onward to a clearing where moss-draped boulders form what looks like a natural amphitheater. Sunlight dapples through the canopy, illuminating streaks of iron oxide that glint coppery gold in the half-light. Your guide kneels, pressing a raw chunk of quartz under your nose. Crush this, and you'll smell gold's sweet tang, he says. You grind the stone between the rough palms, and a faint metallic scent rises proof that ore lies within. Mainstream fact, by the 4th century CE, gold mining in the Bambouk and Bure regions employed simple fire setting and crushing techniques to extract dust from quartz veins, providing the raw material that enriched early Ghana and Mali empires. You almost hear the echo of those hammer blows in your mind, a callback to palace artisans hammering gold mosaics in Section 5. The guide stands and gestures to a narrow fissure in the rock wall, its mouth yawning like a portal to the underworld. He leans closer, voice hushed. Down there flows the river of King Bilal, an underground stream of pure gold dust that never runs dry. Historians still argue whether such subterranean rivers were literal sources tapped by miners or symbolic metaphors for the kingdom's vast reserves. But you feel the magnetic pull of the tale. Joke 2. If your shower head dispensed gold mist instead of water, you'd never complain about slow pressure again. You slide into the cool darkness headlamp, slicing a narrow beam over slick walls, etched with primitive carvings, fish scale patterns, coiled serpents, and star compass lines, reminiscent of those you traced on canoe decks back in Section 2. Each glyph seems to mark the path to hidden ledges where gold dust pools like cosmic sediment. The air is damp and echoing. Every drip from stalactites creates a staccato drum, a primordial Morse code inviting you deeper. You follow a thin shaft of light to a stone basin carved into the ground. Its surface is littered with microflakes that sparkle in your beam. Your fingertips hover above the dust, electricity crackling at the thought of pocketing mere grains of that subterranean wealth. Suddenly, the guide whispers a warning. Beware the night drake's roar. Fringe belief tells of a subterranean serpent that guards the golden waters, its hiss rattling cavern roofs when greedy hands approach. Scientists dismiss the night drake as a natural echo phenomenon, wind and water tricking eager ears, but you shiver at the idea of a living guardian slithering through shadows. Joke 3. If your Siri ever glitched, it might think it's a night drake and start spitting lava warnings when you ask for directions. You emerge blinking into daylight pouch, heavy with stolen dreams. The guide leads you to a shallow creek where locals mill gold dust-laden sand in wooden bowls. You kneel rinsing the ore in the cool flow and watch the heavier flakes settle like falling stars in the bowl's curve. Mainstream fact traditional placer mining in Mali's river plains use simple sluice boxes and hand-raked pans techniques dating back centuries and still practiced by remote communities today. You recall the canoe convoys paddling dust-laden pouches downstream in Section 2. Now you're part of the upstream origin story. As afternoon wanes, you follow a goat path upward to a plateau overlooking rolling savanna. There, bathed in golden sunset, stands a monumental mound, the fabled Mountain of Gold. Fringe lore claims it is a collapsed mine shaft, exposing raw veins that glint from miles away. Scholars still argue whether the Mountain of Gold was ever a genuine seam or simply a natural rise of iron-rich rock misread by dreamers, but you stare at its shimmering slope, glittering like a promise unfulfilled. Joke 4. If Pinterest boards curated travel ideas in ancient times, Hike the Mountain of Gold would be the top trend, complete with DIY dust mask tutorials. You pitch a small mosque cloth beneath an acacia and rest, letting dusk's gentle breeze brush your sweat-soaked tunic. You crunch a handful of roasted peanuts for energy, their oil-slick crunch echoing distant drum beats. The savanna's hush seems to hum with subterranean echoes, a cosmic lullaby inviting you to dream of veins of aurum threading beneath your feet. Historians still argue whether such mythic mines drove real expeditions or served as cautionary tales against greed, but you embrace both meanings as you trace the horizon's golden glow. Before you head back, You fill your leather pouch with a spoonful of dust from the plateau's edge, a souvenir of myth and reality entwined. The guide smiles, his teeth gleaming like the very metal he guards. Carry this with care, he says, whether river-washed or mountain-born, gold shapes kingdoms and souls alike. You nod, belt the pouch at your waist, and begin the return trek through acacia shadows. As night settles, you reach the riverside camp where canoe crews roast fish over fire pits. You join them, balancing your newfound dust in a wooden bowl, watching the dust dance in firelight. The fragrant smoke curls around your memories of subterranean rivers and sunken veins, weaving them into the larger bedtime history rivers. Caravans, carts, and now hidden gold veins that shimmer at the edge of belief. You lie back on your woven mat by the fire, feeling the day's treasure weigh lightly on your hip. The night breeze carries the echo of termite mound legends, caravan chants, and canoe convoys, each a strand in the golden tapestry of empires forged on humble grains of dust. And as stars emerge above their light, merging with your dreams of hidden riches, you realize that some treasures lie not in the pouch, but in the stories that glitter through time. You settle at a shaded clearing beside the river, the late afternoon heat softening into a golden haze as you unpack your latest haul of glittering dust. Tonight isn't about panning or caravans. It's about turning those flecks into standardized wealth gold dust minting and the birth of dust-backed coinage. You tap your wooden pan against your thigh, sending microflakes dancing like fireflies before scooping them into a set of palm-sized bronze weights stamped with royal seals. The air smells of river mud and heated metal, and you almost taste the promise of liquidity in every grain you tip onto the scale. A nearby artisan in russet robes hammers a small gold bar on an iron anvil, the rhythmic pings echoing across the clearing. Fringe folklore claims that each bar is kissed by a priestess to bind it to the king's spirit, ensuring that every piece of gold carries royal essence, an ancient ritual modern skeptics dismiss as ceremony over substance. You grin at the idea of blessed bullion, folding it into your mental ledger alongside termite mound vaults and grease-coated cheats. Joke one, if Hallmark sold consecrated coins, they'd market them as in case of royal emergency break seal. You lean in as the artisan slips the flattened bar into a charcoal-heated mold carved from red clay press marks of a crowned fish striking the bar's surface before it cools. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 15th century, West African rulers like those of the Songhai used standardized gold bars, often 1/8 to 1/4 troy ounce, to facilitate high-value trade, effectively creating proto-coin tokens that circulated alongside raw dust. The molds bear simple geometric patterns easily recognized by merchants from Gao to Timbuktu, so you nod, savoring the tactile click as each cooled bar is tapped free. Beyond the minting hearth, you overhear traders testing fresh proto-coins on bamboo scales. A merchant in indigo dabs a bar with candle soot fingers, tracing the embossed seal to verify authenticity. Scholars still argue whether these bars truly circulated as coin or served primarily as royal tribute tokens, requiring conversion back to dust at market stalls. But you watch the merchant's confidence in those seals sparkle brighter than any embarrassing eBay seller feedback. A fringe mint master in teal robes offers you a curious coin carved from ivory and tipped with dust inlay, explaining that some coastal kingdoms counterfeited gold tokens using polished elephant tusk to skirt royal taxes. Scientists scoff at the durability of ivory under market stress, but you admire the ingenuity until you realize the tusk token would lose value if soaked in river water. Joke 2. If Monopoly issued ivory tokens, every game night would end in a swamp meltdown. As dusk deepens, you join a wooden table lit by oil lamps, where a group of scribes records each minted bar in a ledger bound with cowrie shell clasps. The ledger's pages are palm leaves coated in beeswax, and shell gold flourishes listing bar weights, seal numbers, and issuing authorities. Mainstream historical fact: royal mints in Gao and Timbuktu maintained strict records from the 14th century onward, employing scribes who chronicled each ingot to prevent fraud and track yearly tribute quotas. You trace a gilded character with your fingertip, feeling the raised shell gold as though reading a braille of wealth. A lanky youth stands nearby with a carved wooden stave marking stamped bars into long rows. He hums a rhythmic chant to recall standard weights. Historians still argue whether these mnemonic verses were formal guild hymns or improvised memory aids. But you find yourself nodding along to the tune, the cadence weaving into your own mental star compass of bullion. On a low stool, a dust merchant in saffron opens a leather satchel and pours a trickle of gold dust coins, tiny cylindrical nuggets pressed into organic molds, into your cupped hands. They clink softly like metallic raindrops, and you feel the satisfying tingle of compact wealth ready for trade. Fringe rumor insists these coinlets were sometimes scented with myrrh to discourage thieves from biting them, though perfumed metals might attract rather than repel sticky fingers. Joke 3. If Tiffany made scented gold charms, they'd smell luxurious, but you'd still lose them in your purse. Night falls, and the clearing's lamp glow picks out the mint's final wares bars, coinlets, and even seashell discs tipped with dust, each representing a distinct local currency backed by the same raw resource. You flick through your own pouch, curious how many different denominations you've carried, from riverine scales in Jenne to camel route bars in Tagaza. The diversity feels dizzying, yet the common denominator is that every token fronts the flickering promise of gold. As you prepare to leave, you visit the mint master's apprentice, who demonstrates a secret acid test, a drop of lemon juice that darkens base metals but leaves pure gold shining bright. It's a low-tech spectrometer of sorts. Historians still argue whether chemical assays like this were widespread or limited to elite mints. But you relish the simplicity squeeze watch and trust your senses, no diploma required. Before stepping onto your waiting canoe, you load a small wooden crate with a standardized set of bars and coinlets, ready for trade in distant kingdoms. The crate's lid is carved with a fish motif and gilded loops echoing those on the mint seals, a callback to palace serried processions, Section 5, and riverine flotillas, Section 2. You heft the crate's weight heavier with expectation than metal, and feel the pulse of economic evolution in your spine. As the flotilla drifts away under lantern-lit oars, you watch the mince glow fade into the night. You slip the ivory tusk token, the scented coinlet, and a clean bronze bar into your pouch, each a microcosm of the journey from raw dust to circulating currency. And as your canoe glides into the reflections of oil lamps on bronze water, you sense the full alchemy, how kingdoms turned river dust into minted wealth, forging commerce and power in the crucibles of community and craft. You slip into Jenna's bustling market at first light, following the scent of fresh millet porridge and hot oil that drifts past stalls heaped with woven mats and drip-waxed gourds. Here, women draped in indigo wrappers move like currents through the crowd, balancing shallow bowls of gold dust on their heads, weaving through clamoring traders with graceful precision. You trail a matriarch in saffron, her baskets of weighed coins and raw dust secured by slender fingers clad in brass rings, and you realize how underappreciated these networks of female traders and weavers truly are, quiet pillars holding aloft the shimmering edifice of gold commerce. You lean in as she kneels before a line of buyers laying out palm-sized scales and smooth brass weights. With meticulous strokes, she sweeps dust into perfect heaps, each granule dancing in the morning sun like tiny suns reborn. Mainstream historical fact chroniclers from the 14th century note that women in the Niger Bend were primary vendors of gold dust, operating market stalls and itinerant trading circuits that funneled precious metal into imperial coffers, while men largely managed caravan security and royal administration. You almost taste the iron-tinged sweetness of her trade in the humid air, and you count the micro-ounces she releases with almost hypnotic control. A fringed tidbit drifts through her whispered banter. Some guilds of women navigators once wove secret dust routes into their cloth braids, encoding trading pathways into colorful patterns that only they could decipher. An oral visual navigation system, historians still argue, might have existed or could be an invented tradition to bolster women's prestige. You bite your lip to suppress a smile. If your Fitbit tried to track that hidden network, it'd get hopelessly tangled in tassels and prosperity. You follow her to the riverbank, where riverine flotillas wait to take dust southward. She perches on a low wooden stool, expertly tipping pouches of river-wash specks into a bamboo sieve and washing away silt with rhythmic motions honed over seasons. The water glints with drifting motes, and her deft hands catch every flake as though performing a silent ritual. Joke one, if your Roomba tried this trick, it'd complain about dust overload and quarantine itself in a padded room. Across the quay, younger women in teal skirts crouch beneath braided tents, weaving intricate mats from palm fronds stamped with shell gold dust motifs. Each mat tells a story, the number of trading days lived the rivers crossed the caravans trusted. A scribe in russet marks tally sticks beside them. Historians still argue whether these weaving codes were formal guild languages or spontaneous personal expressions, but you admire the artistry that turns commerce into living tapestry. Joke 2. If IKEA offered these mats, they'd sell out in minutes, and you'd still need an Allen key to assemble your living room. At midday, you join a circle of female weavers on the shady side of a baobab. They exchange dusty pouches for dyed cloth tallying sales with clicks of cowrie shell abacuses. Their laughter rings out like polished bells as they tease a newcomer fumbling bamboo beads into a weighing pan. Balance more dust, balance less drama. Joke 3. If you ever need sass with your scales, these ladies will deliver a duet of gold and gossip. You wander to a shaded alcove where a council of elder women convenes. They sit on carved wooden benches, ringed by brass bowls and ink-stained tablets, adjudicating disputes over faulty weights and tangled debts. One elder plucks a chipped bronze weight from the pile and holds it up. This one sings false, she declares, using an iron fire tongue to tap-test its tone. Mainstream historical fact by the 11th century official assayers, often women appointed by local rulers enforced standardized weights and seals in West African markets, ensuring fair trade and punishing cheats. Her voice carries both authority and warmth, and you feel the market's heartbeat pulse in her verdict. Further down along a dusty track leading to caravan encampments, women squat beside twin pits, dug into the sand, roasting grains of sesame and soaking them in honey for traders' rations. They barter snacks for dust, then shift to counting specks by candlelight, their chatter a soft susurrus against the crackle of embers. Fringe rumor insists that a handful of those honeyed sesame seeds once chewed at moonrise reveals hidden trading lies in the dust, an auditory olfactory lie detector that modern scientists dismiss as untestable whimsy. You tuck the idea into your mental map, amused at the ingenuity born of necessity. As sunset arrives, the market slows. You return to Shenna's main road, where women lead laden donkeys toward hidden vaults, mud brick chambers sealed with palm fiber ropes where dust is stored overnight. You watch them weave the ropes with fingers agile as dancers, each knot a pledge between woman and cargo that no thief's hand slips inside. Historians still argue whether these vaults were communal stores or private treasuries of elite matriarchs, but you sense both civic trust and personal stake in each braided strand. Night falls, stars shimmer overhead, each one a waypoint as vital as any gold pointer in your mind, and the market's lamps flicker to life. Women drift back to river canoes, balancing bowls of dust on their heads, while male companions stoke fires beneath iron cauldrons for evening porridge. You stand amid the glow, inhaling jasmine-scented breeze and the faint perfume of heated metal, feeling the invisible network of female traders, weavers, and assayers converge into one luminous tapestry. It's clear that gold dust trades would founder without their skill and subtle power. You step into your own canoe, settling beside a stack of mats stamped with dust motif weaves. The hull creaks beneath you, call back to the coiled serpent prow from Section 2, then rocks in time with the paddle strokes that will ferry dust toward distant kingdoms. You carry with you not just gold, but the memory of every woman who weighed, wove, and guarded each precious mote. And as your flotilla drifts into the night, you recognize that behind every glittering empire stands a hidden sisterhood of gold-guiding women, weaving futures one speck at a time. You step onto the rocky promontory at dawn, the Atlantic surf hissing against darkened cliffs as you approach the newly erected Portuguese fort. its whitewashed walls glinting in the soft morning light. A salty breeze tangles your hair, carrying the brine-kissed scent of smoking fish from nearby canoes. All around, local carrying boys in teal tunics heft leather pouches of gold dust onto sturdy wooden scales set on the fort's weathered parapet. The air hums with the clash of two worlds colliding, the deep-rooted rhythms of inland dust pathways meeting the rigid protocols of European coastal exchange. Joke 1. If Uber launched Fort Mode, you'd need a cannonball surcharge and a GPS that survives cannon smoke. At the port's heart, a Portuguese alguacil in russet sash inspects a pouch of glimmering specks with an iron fire tongue, its hiss echoing off ramparts. Mainstream historical fact in 1482, C.E. the Portuguese constructed Elmina Castle, then called São Jorge de Mina, on the Gold Coast to monopolize West African gold dust trade, redirecting centuries-old inland routes to their coastal factories. You almost taste the dust's metallic tang whipped by the sea wind, and recall canoe convoys slipping downstream in Section 2, now replaced by creaking ship timbers and European sails snapping overhead. Inside the fort's courtyard, you wander past stacked pilings of brass weights, stamped with royal seals, reminders of earlier weatherside mints. Section 10 now lying abandoned as dust for ducat trade surges. Fringe tidbit drifts from a weather-beaten merchant, some say Portuguese traders, once coated their brass ducats with a thin layer of dust to deceive African buyers about purity and early form of gilded marketing. Scholars still argue whether these gold-sprinkled coins were widespread or merely sailors' tall tales spun at midnight watch, but you tuck that rumor alongside termite mound vaults. Section 9, amused at human fancy. Beyond the rampart shadow, you slip into the shadow of a palm grove where coastal kingdoms hold court. A Legon trader from the Akan hinterland kneels before a Benin emissary offering a leather satchel of dust in exchange for European firearms and glass beads. The emissary admires the pouch's braided Senate ties, callbacks to women traders' intricate weight tests. Section 11 then gestures to a table piled with gleaming arquebus barrels and cobalt blue beads. Historians still argue whether these early arms fundamentally altered inland power balances or simply augmented existing arsenals. But you see the glint of opportunity in every trader's eye. Walking the narrow causeway between stockades, you pass a small market enclave where women squat beside palm frond stalls, weighing dust on Portuguese brass scales. Their deft fingers, reminders of Jenne's female vendors, adjust the tiny weights as they recite standardized measures in a sing-song chant, harmonizing with the distant boom of fortress cannons testing their range. Joke 2. If you swapped out coconut shells for Wi-Fi routers, you'd still lose connection once the fort's walls blocked the signal. Midday sun blazes across the parapets, and you ascend a spiral wooden staircase to the fort's upper deck. A lookout scans the horizon through a spyglass, an alien contraption to inland panners used to naked eye navigation. Section 8. You watch his finger trace invisible lines across the sky as though mapping dust routes by horizon alone. Mainstream historical fact, the introduction of European navigation tools, compasses, astrolabes, and hourglasses, gave coastal forts strategic oversight of both sea lanes and river mouths, enabling them to intercept gold shipments. before they reached traditional hubs. You shiver at the thought of those dusty caravans rerouted by foreign optics. Below you spot a flotilla of canoes paddling toward the fort's landing bay, their prows peppered with shell gold motifs echoing the motifs carved by Songhai artisans. Section 8. The canoe crews call to each other in Hausa and Songhai voices rattling with gossip. Some inland chieftains now demand coastal tolls, else refuse to supply dust pouches to European merchants. Historians still argue whether this new toll system was a savvy assertion of local autonomy or mere profiteering at the expense of traditional caravan routes. But you hear the clatter of wooden coins and smell the desperation in every sack. As afternoon drifts toward evening, you drift to a low platform where coastal lords host a lavish feast beneath thatched pavilions. You recline on palm mats, dipping a bowl of millet porridge spiced with clove and anise into honeyed goat stew. A troubadour in indigo sings a dirge-like melody about the dust that once flowed freely from the rivers now trickling through European jumble. Fringe belief murmurs that coastal sorcerers broke inland dust veins to force capital southward, an ominous metaphor for economic realignment that modern economists nod at with skeptical laughs. You let the melody wash over you, savoring both stew and satire. Joke 3. If Spotify streamed medieval African folk, this would be your gold dust removal playlist. Night falls, and lanterns swing from wooden beams, casting quivering shadows on the sea chalk mural depicting ancient gold roots. You wander to the mural's edge and trace your finger along the painted path, Jenne to Timbuktu, Sudan, to Taghaza, and now a new red arrow pointing to the European fort. It hits you that this arrow redrew the entire map, pulling inland trade into a braided coil of coastal dependency. Mainstream historical fact, by the early 16th century, over 70% of West African gold dust passed through Portuguese-controlled forts, undermining the autonomy of Sahelian empires and redirecting wealth flows to European treasuries. You exhale, feeling the weight of that shift settle like a stone in your chest. In a final twist, you slip into the fort's chapel, a modest room where Portuguese priests baptize local converts. Gold dust pouches hang from the rafters as offering, each sack tied with palm fiber cords and inscribed with saints' names. A friar in saffron murmurs prayers for safe passage of souls, and dust like his voice echoing off stone walls. Historians still argue whether missionary efforts facilitated Portuguese commercial monopoly or were simply concurrent endeavors. But you sense the blend of salvation and speculation. Two forces, divine and mercantile, reinforcing one another under the same vaulted sky. You step back into the twilight air, the fort's torches flickering like second-rate constellations. You watch canoes load up the last of the day's dust under watchful European eyes, then drift away under lantern-lit oars. In your pouch, you feel the soft jingle of standardized bars Section 10 and raw dust Section 2, each grain a testament to the evolving currents of power. As your canoe skims away, you carry the memory of coastal kingdoms reshaped by foreign forts, of inland lords forced to renegotiate ancient pathways, and of gold's uncanny ability to redraw maps. And as the Atlantic night breeze cools your sweat, you realize that the bedtime history of dust markets is far from over its next chapter, already glimmering on the horizon. You trudge through the overgrown causeway of an abandoned caravan station, the midday sun beating down on cracked mud walls that once thrummed with dust-laden bustle. Vines weave through broken palm fiber roofs, and termite mounds, cracked open, reveal flecks of dust that glint mournfully in the heat. This is the decline of dust empires and the colonial dawn, a world where shifting tastes, foreign pressures, and waning royal authority leave once proud kingdoms hollowed like dried gourds. Once these halls shimmered with the clink of bronze scales and the rustle of cowrie-woven sacks. Now scattered pouches of gold dust lie forgotten in sandy corners as traders pivot toward new exports, palm oil, ivory, and increasingly human Hemjoke one. If Netflix made a spin-off, Dust to Dust, it'd be a tragic comedy of empires scrounging for new income streams. By the 16th century, Portuguese forts and coastal trade had siphoned off riverine and desert routes, rerouting dust to Atlantic markets, and the flow slowed to a trickle. Mainstream historical fact: between 1500 and 1700 CE, West African gold production declined by over 60% as rich alluvial veins were exhausted, and European demand shifted to New World mines. You nearly taste the irony: European investors chasing California's El Dorado, while once vibrant Sahelian economies sag under depleted placer fields. Historians still argue whether overmining or ecological change caused the collapse. But either way, the riverbanks grew quieter. In Jenna's abandoned mint, you find rusted brass weights and broken bamboo scales strewn across cracked flagstones. Fringed tidbit whispers that some desperate assayers salted their bars with silver dust from Iberian ships, an early case of steampunk fraud to prop up sagging treasuries. Scientists scoff at the practicality, but you imagine a half-silvered ingot confusing both traders and historians for centuries. Joke 2. If Etsy sold these half-and-half bars today, they'd market them as bimetallic boomerangs that confuse collectors. Meanwhile, overhunting of elephants for ivory carved a new export path, drawing female traders from Gold Stall Section 11 into ivory caravans bound for São Jorge de Mina. Palm oil presses sprouted at riverbanks, and enslaved labor-built coastal plantations, shifting economic focus from dust to human sweat. Mainstream historical fact: by the 18th century, the transatlantic slave trade eclipsed gold as West Africa's leading export, funneling labor to New World colonies and hollowing local populations, and you feel that human toll deep in the hush of deserted market halls. Historians still argue whether debt peonage or outright kidnapping dominated the trade's early years, but you see both in dusty camps half lost to scraggly brush. You push open corroded mint doors in Gao, where colonial treaties forced inland chiefs to cede dust rights to French and British administrators. The mint's machinery lies silent, and paper-thin colonial maps hang on termite-eaten walls, carving new provinces over ancient dust routes. Fringe rumor from village griots insists that secret resistance cells once smuggled gold dust under missionary watches, hiding it in hollow calabashes to fund uprisings, tales dismissed as romantic revisionism by some, yet you feel their echo in every whispered defiance. Joke 3. If you tried that trick today with a GoPro camera, you'd just end up streaming your own arrest. On the coast, a British factor in a crisp pith helmet oversees dusty coastal forts tallying gold alongside palm kernels, with his steel-tipped quill. He frowns as his ledger reads, "Gold declining," though his superiors demand silver bars instead. Mainstream historical fact, by the mid-19th century, European colonial powers imposed direct taxation in cowrie shells and later in sterling, undermining indigenous dust currencies and cementing colonial fiscal control. You imagine cowrie shell-clogged coffers echoing with the ghost click of lost autonomy. Historians still argue whether these fiscal policies modernized African economies or simply subjugated them. But the pith-helmeted factor's grim set jaw suggests the latter. Further inland you come upon the ruins of the great mosque at Gao, its fluted columns half sunken in sand and its minarets leaning. You recall the golden fountains of Cairo Section 7 and the polished cloisters of Jannah Section 3, now reduced to fractured kilns and weed-choked courtyards. Fringe belief holds that if you recite the old gold tax chants beneath the mosque's arches, you'll hear the roar of empty coffers, echoing back an acoustic apparition, warning of fortunes lost to time. Scholars still argue whether collective memory seals such ghostly acoustics or simply amplifies human longing. But you feel a chill as the wind whispers through cracked adobe. In a riverside village near Timbuktu, women traders once famed for dust panning now gather to weave palm baskets for peanuts and millet. The soot-blackened hearths that once singed gold-washed sieves now roast peanuts for export. Mainstream historical fact, by the late 19th century, peanuts and groundnuts became major cash crops in Senegal and Mali, displacing gold dust as local currency and livelihood. You taste the smoky oil on your lips, nothing like the faint metallic tang of gold, yet sustained communities through colonial upheaval. You stand atop a sandy bluff overlooking the Niger Delta, the delta's azure waters spilt with silt, but no longer flecked gold. Below canoes, ferry rice paddies in place of dust pouches, and children dive for fish in muddy shallows. The hush here is not empty. It's a new promise, writ in aquatic arcs. A resilient adaptation after the Golden Age. You inhale deeply and sense the river reclaiming its rhythms, the forest sprouting anew where termite mounds once presaged hidden veins. As evening drapes violet across the sky, you pause at a colonial-era steamer's rusted hull, grounded on the bank. It once carried gold dust to European markets, now rusts, beside briar and acacia. In its corroded hold, you imagine the last shipments of African gold, bound for Antwerp and Lisbon, their dreams of wealth, sliding down molten decks into foreign treasuries. Historians still argue whether colonial extraction enriched or ruined West Africa, but standing before the hull's yawning maw, you feel the weight of centuries unfold in rust and ruin. You descend to the river's edge, stirring the muddy flow with your palm, and watch silt billow like ancient smoke. You scoop a handful, find a single fleck of gold glinting in the dusk, and slip it into your pouch, a solitary promise of what once was. And in that silent moment, you realize that dust empires may decline, but the stories they glittered across riverbanks and dunes will never fade. You wander into a modern goldsmith's workshop in Accra, the air heavy with the metallic perfume of molten owl, as craftsmen in indigo smocks hammer filigree earrings techniques echoing the palace artisans of Section 5. Beads of sweat glint on your brow under the forge's glow, and you almost hear the rhythmic ping of hammer on anvil as a lullaby. This is the living legacy of gold dust markets, traces of ancient roots pulsing through today's customs, jewelry traditions, and economic memories. A smooth ebony counter is strewn with polished labete bracelets, flat bands of gold dust pressed into armlets, loops, and spirals, reminiscent of Songhai's royal seals from Section 8. You lift one feeling, its surprising lightness, and slip it on. It settles against your wrist like a whisper of history. Mainstream fact, modern small-scale goldsmithing in Ghana employs over 200,000 artisans and contributes roughly 5% of national GDP, keeping centuries-old metalwork alive in hands both young and old. You almost taste the pride on your tongue, sweet as palm wine at a harvest festival. Beyond the counter, a woman in saffron head wrap threads a necklace of cowrie shell beads interspersed with tiny gold dust-filled globules, a direct callback to the shell-inlaid breastplates of traders in Section 3. She hums a low tune learned from her grandmother. By river's bank and caravan's path, let gold bind kin and kindred craft. Fringe tidbit whispers that some matriarchs still stitch secret star chart patterns into the lining of bridal necklaces, each stitch mapping riverine roots back to ancestral homelands. Scientists dismiss this as romantic embroidery, but you imagine the shimmering grid secreted beneath satin. You step outside into the midday bustle of Makola Market, where traders hail you from stalls draped in teal tarps. Towering piles of yellow yam bins of red palm oil and stalls of handcrafted jewelry cluster together like an open-air museum. You duck under a woven canopy to watch a jeweler weigh out gold dust on modern digital scales, a far cry from the bamboo balances of Section 2, yet the same sacred dust dusted across centuries. A clerk taps out the decimal digits with a flourish as though each number were a coin in its own right. Historians still argue whether the shift to digital weighing erodes artisanal skill or safeguards against age-old cheats. But you sense both progress and loss in the hum of the display. A schoolgirl in russet uniform clutches her mother's hand wide-eyed at a vitrines of dust and glass pendants, small droplets of gold dust resin encapsulated like amber fossils. Fringe rumor says these pendants capture the wearer's dreams, drawing dust visions of lost caravan camps as you sleep. You suppress a grin joke one if your Fitbit ever tracked dream quality, it'd log dusty REM cycles without explanation. Further down, you encounter a troop of women traders in indigo robes echoing Section 11's matriarchs, their voices rising in a sing-song chorus as they weigh dust pouches against bars stamped with contemporary mint logos. They flirt with customers, teasing, "You better pay in true dust, or we'll trade you our cooking oil instead." You laugh, joke too. If Tinder had a market version, these women would reinvent swipe right as swap right and still end up with the best offers. The midday sun transforms the market's corrugated iron roofs into a chrome canopy, under which an indulged elder recounts oral histories beside a small shrine of glazed pots filled with dust and ivory charms. He sprinkles a pinch into a copper basin, chanting a verse from the old River Mother hymn in Section 1 gold from headwater to Palace Gate, we bear your grace through callous fate. Mainstream fact annual festivals like Ghana's Homo Wo integrate symbolic sprinklings of dust, during blessings for abundant harvests and safe travels, linking agricultural rhythms to ancient gold dust routes. You recall the feast fanfares at Kayamaga's Court Section 5 and taste the bittersweet echo of that ritual in your own mouth. You drift into a modern bank branch framed with polished marble and LED screens. A smiling banker in teal tie shows you a shiny gold-backed savings certificate guaranteeing returns tied to international bullion rates. You grip the laminated card, the gold foil glimmering under fluorescent lights, and feel the irony centuries ago, dust weighed on wooden scales. Today, it floats as digital entries. Historians still argue whether gold-backed certificates maintain tangible trust or simply encourage speculative bubbles. Yet the banker's pitch rings with the same promise of lasting value that once drew caravans across dunes. Midday slow fades into afternoon shadows, and you stroll toward a jewelry museum where CNN-style displays recount the routes from Jenia to Cairo and Gao to Elmina. In a glass case, a set of brass weights from Section 6 gleams beside a modern scale bridging eras of fraud prevention. You tap the glass and murmur, from camel fur cheats to digital audits, gold dust markets adapt, but endure. Joke 3. If these exhibits had audio guides, they'd need a glitch to simulate the clink of ancient weights for authenticity. A local artisan invites you to his workshop behind the museum. He teaches you to purify raw dust in a shallow dish of lemon juice, reviving the acid test from Section 10, then pound it into thin leaf for filigree. You feel the grainy slurry under your fingertips warming to paste and marvel at how every step mirrors ancestral techniques taught under thatch and torchlight. You trace the now restored whale tail motif into the gold leaf, a callback to reclaimed paddles carved in Section 3, and realize that modern artisans are both protectors and innovators of living tradition. At sunset, you join a rooftop gathering where fashion designers drape models in contemporary kente cloth threaded with metallic fibers and gold dust motifs. The runway pulses with Afro-futuristic beats, and you sip hibiscus wine spiced with cinnamon, an invigorating finale to dust's journey through time. Fringe fashion rumor claims that some high-end labels infuse garments with microscopic dust to grant good luck at events, though critics call it marketing hype. You let the music wash over you, the dust shimmer on cloth, and feel the lineage of style woven through centuries of gold's allure. As night deepens, you stand under the star-scattered sky above Accra's skyline, the Milky Way's faint streak, a silent mirror to city lights. You feel the ancient compass in your bones, the same star arcs that guided riverine canoes and camel caravans in Sections 2 and 4, now pointing you toward tomorrow's innovations. You taste the dust lingering on your lips, a metallic benediction reminding you that beyond markets and money, gold dust's true legacy is the human networks it forged, the traditions it sustained, and the stories it wrote in clinking scales and braided ropes. You head back to your lodgings, clutching a small bracelet hammered from pure dust in this very workshop. Its clasp, only you, can open a secret map of memory. And as you drift off, you sense the ripple of ancient pathways intertwining with modern roads, weaving gold's promise into the fabric of West Africa's future. The dust may shift and the markets may evolve, but the golden thread endures tracing roots of trade and tradition across river dune and city street alike. You wade into the cool shallows of the Niger at dawn, the river's breath soft against your calves, and you let the culmination of this golden odyssey settle into your bones. Upstream, you recall the spark of dust trade in Section 1, where tiny flecks lit local barters. Downstream, the flotillas of Sections 2 and 3 carried that promise into market towns. You trace the arc of your journey across dunes courts and colonial ports, each step a shimmer on history's riverbed. This final reflection isn't about mapping trade routes. It's about honoring how those fragile grains of gold-shaped kingdoms, economies, and human stories across centuries. You pause on a sun-warmed pebble, inhaling the scent of silt and papyrus, tasting the faint metallic tang that lingers on your tongue, just a memory of river-scrubbed dust. It's intoxicating in its subtlety, a reminder that gold's power often lies in its quiet accumulation rather than blinding spectacle. Mainstream historical fact at its height, the Trans-Saharan gold trade accounted for over one-third of all gold circulating in the medieval Mediterranean, underpinning royal treasuries from Cairo to Granada. You feel that weight and value ripple through your mind, connecting distant courts and coastal forts in a single thread of awe. As you tilt your head, the early morning light catches on chipped pottery shards, remnants of ancient weighing stations where traders once tested dust purity, echoes of the crafty frauds in Section 6. Fringe lore suggests that some pouches once carried tiny vials of desert dew distilled from hidden oases, believed to amplify a trader's luck when dust seemed scarce. Scientists dismiss it as meteorological whimsy, but you replay that rumor alongside termite mound vaults and salt-coated coins amused by humanity's endless flair for gilded ingenuity. Joke 1, if Amazon Prime had delivered Oasis Dew, you'd have paid extra for overnight shipping and still run out by sunrise. You stand and walk to where a cluster of market women, descendants of the matriarchs in Section 11, pause their weaving to greet you. They squat on woven mats laid on the riverbank, dipping sieves into currents like they've done for centuries. Their deft hands spin dust into neat heaps, coterie rhythm weaving commerce into community. You remember their tambours of laughter mingling with the drones of coffers in palace courts, Section 5, and the solemn decrees of Songhai diplomacy, Section 8. Historians still argue whether women's networks or royal edicts had greater sway over gold's flow. But you sense that both acted as twin pendulums keeping the economy in balance. A gentle breeze stirs the Kent cloth banners fluttering above their stalls, each pattern a code, a tributary tribute, a mining region, a caravan rest stop. You trace the colorful chevrons and recall the memory island chants of Section 7, where syllables lock geographies into minds. These cloths are mobile maps, each thread a story, an oral visual archive that outlives brittle manuscripts. Joke 2. If Google Maps ever switched to textile mode, you'd need a loom seatbelt and frequent fiber updates. Further along the bank, you glimpse the weathered stones of a colonial-era mint, ghostly reminders from Section 12, where European forts once cracked open inland routes. You remember the iron fire tongs testing coins and clandestine ivory tokens that fooled both trader and scribe. The mint's walls bear Latin graffiti, mixed with Arabic script, a palimpsest of conflicting ambitions. You lean your palm against cooled stone and whisper a soft apology to the artisans whose crafts were upended by foreign edicts. Historians still argue whether colonial trade reforms modernized African economies or simply redirected wealth to European ones. But the Mint's silent stones speak of both disruption and adaptation. You step onto a wooden walkway leading into a modern goldsmith's quarter echoes of Section 14's living legacy, where the hammer's rhythm still resonates against anvils. You watch a young apprentice in indigo fashion a pendant from raw dust, her movements a melody learned across centuries. Mainstream historical fact, today's small-scale gold sector in West Africa employs millions, sustaining artisanal livelihoods even as global markets shift. You recall the coastal feasts and caravan songs now reborn in workshop rituals and contemporary runways that infuse kente cloth with metallic threads. Commentators still argue whether globalization enriches or erases local craft practices, but you feel the pulse of continuity under every hammer blow. As the sun dips toward the western horizon, you return to that single solitary fleck of gold in your pocket, the one you scooped from the plateau. In Section 9, you rub it between thumb and forefinger and marvel at its size, smaller than a grain of rice, yet heavy with memory. You think of the termite mound vaults, the mythic mines, the palace coffers, the coastal forts, and global banks. Every empire, every caravan, every market moved on such tiny treasures. The grandeur of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, Section 7, and the grit of panning in muddy streams. Section 1 converge in this pinch of dust, a grain of shared history. You crouch beside the water's edge, letting the current lap your heel. You whisper a quiet vow to carry these stories forward, to honor the hands, riverine paddlers, desert guides, palace scribes, market women that wove gold into the fabric of society. You stand slowly, dust motes dancing in the last rays of light, and you sense that the golden threads of history, while fragile, have bound people across space and time in ways no conquest or colonization could sever. You inhale deeply, tasting the metallic tang mingled with river steam, and step back onto solid ground. The journey ends here, but the stories you carry of dust, of power, of human cunning and communal trust will echo in your waking world and in bedtime reveries yet to come. The river's hush follows you like a gentle lullaby, and as twilight softens the edges of day, you settle into the quiet rhythm of waves and wind. Each inhalation carries a memory, the metallic tang of dust on your tongue, the earthy pulse of termite mounds hidden beneath forest floors, the resonant gong of hammers shaping gold into princely finery. The chapters of this journey unfold like petals closing at dusk riverbanks and caravan trails, royal courts and coastal forts, secret mines and modern workshops, all woven together by the luminous thread of gold dust. Feel the day's tension melt into a calm embrace. The weight of kingdoms and empires lifts as you rest on the riverbank, the soft swish of water lapping against hulls a reassuring cadence. Let each breath become an oar stroke, gentle, steady, carrying you toward a serene harbor of dreams. The sun's last glow flickers on coppered sands, then fades, leaving only the glow of starlit guides, those same constellations that once anchored riverine panners and desert caravanners alike. In this space between wake and dreams, you carry more than history. You hold the distilled essence of human endeavor, the spark of ambition in a panner's eye, the strategist's whisper in a caravan's hush, the artisan's focused heartbeat at the forge. This distilled gold becomes a compass for your thoughts, guiding you through the landscapes of memory and imagination. Even as sleep beckons, the stories you've gathered will pulse softly in the darkness, each a spark in the constellation of your dreams. As your eyelids grow heavy, let the ancient chants, Memory Island's verses, and palace hymns mingle with the quiet murmur of river reeds. Here, under a vaulted sky that stretches from Timbuktu to Cairo to the Atlantic shore, navigation is simply trust, trusting dust, to weigh truth stories, to bind communities, and your own heart to carry golden threads onward. Drift now into the realm of dreams, where each fleck of gold glints like a star, lighting the path to new voyages yet to come. End of script. Sweet dreams.